they can fulfill their rights, including the right everyone has to participate in decisions that affect their own lives. Quickly, I'll turn to the UNHCR Age, Gender, and Diversity approach, which is one of the cornerstones of our community-based protection work. Many of you know that the Age, Gender, and Diversity policy requires us to identify and consult with people from different ages, genders, and diversity groups. We all know, for example, that older people have different needs and capacities than younger people do, as do boys and men, girls and women. But the diversity category is maybe one of the least obvious distinctions. Under the diversity category, we're talking about things like minority, ethnic, linguistic, religious, and national groups, or LGBTI individuals, or people with disabilities, for example. All of this, I would refer you to our Need to Know guidance series that we've released on primarily related to different diversity categories, and I'll give you the website at the end of the presentation. Applying an age, gender, and diversity lens helps us to be sure that we identify all of these groups and that we give them an opportunity to participate. The ultimate goal of this is that all segments of a population that we work with will have equal access to and equal enjoyment of their rights. I'll just quickly run through the three approaches that I mentioned earlier that also underpin community-based protection. So first is obviously the community-based approach, which implies that communities engage meaningfully and substantially in all aspects of programs that affect them. This strengthens the community's role as a driving force for change. A community-based approach will provide a better analysis of the problems so that the response is based on the real needs, perspectives, and interests of the people as they themselves have expressed them. Second is the rights-based approach, which recognizes that all refugees are rights holders with legal entitlements. This is in contrast to a needs-based approach, which sees refugees as passive recipients of humanitarian aid and support. And finally, the participatory approach, which refers to the full and equal involvement of all members of the community in decision-making processes and activities that affect their lives. Basically, a participatory approach requires that we listen to refugees and IDPs. And of course, the age, gender, and diversity policy and approach flows through all of this, and each of these build on each other and reinforce one another. Quickly on accountability to affected populations. This refers to the responsible use of power and the systems that support this, combined with effective and quality programming. Accountability to affected populations means taking account, giving account, and being held to account. Taking account is giving affected people influence over decision-making in a way that's inclusive, non-discriminatory, and accounts for the diversity of communities. Participation and feedback mechanisms are good, but alone those aren't enough. People of concern need to have real influence on our decisions and our programming. Giving account is about sharing information in an effective and transparent way across the affected communities. We need to share information about things like agency roles and responsibilities, entitlements that people could have, targeting and selection criteria, programming changes and why we've made those changes, complaints mechanisms, how people can feed back to us. Of course, we have to remember that information needs to be conveyed in a way that's understandable to the target audience. And finally, being held to account means giving others the opportunity to assess and, where appropriate, sanction our actions. Being accountable involves actually asking communities what they think about our work and its fairness and effectiveness, listening to them, and then adapting accordingly. The components of an accountability system need to be present and utilized throughout the program cycle. So it's not just at the assessment phase, but also during analysis, planning, design, resource mobilization, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So all that brings us to community-based protection, which encompasses all of those concepts that I've just gone through. Community-based protection empowers communities to play a leading role in their own protection. But remember, it's not just their own physical protection, but we're also talking about basic rights and services like health, education, and livelihoods. Community-based protection puts the capacities, agency, rights, and dignity of persons of concern at the center of our programming. It requires us to understand communities so that we avoid harm and that we ensure that our programs don't inadvertently leave them worse off. It's also important for us to remember that if we engage communities in their own protection, that's preparing them for durable solutions. People who are empowered and self-reliant in displacement will be more successful in their pursuit of durable solutions later. And the link between communities and protection is mutually reinforcing. So we work through community mechanisms, which enhances protection, but the enhanced protection also strengthens the communities. We've been working for over a decade on community-based approaches as a way of strengthening protection. And so the term community-based protection may not always be familiar to everyone, but I think that I've at least quickly been able to show you that the concepts and the approaches that underpin it are generally familiar to UNHCR and other humanitarian actors. In this, I'd like to refer you to our Understanding Community-Based Protection paper, which you can also find on our website, and you'll see the link at the end of this. I'll quickly go through some of it here. It draws on guidance materials, interviews with practitioners, and field visits. And basically what we've done is pulled together 12 key community-based protection lessons. And our hope is that this will help UNHCR staff and partners at all levels to integrate community-based protection approaches in their humanitarian work. So now what I've put up is a list of the 12 principles of community-based protection. I'll go through them quickly and try to point out areas where they're particularly important in urban settings. First is that community-based protection is a process and not a project. It's not just about holding meetings and setting up community groups, but those things can be important. But it takes sustained effort and long-term commitment, particularly with dispersed urban populations. We need to build trust with the community, learn from them, and revise our plans and strategies accordingly. Second, community counterparts have to be selected with care. Since it's not possible for us to work directly with everybody in the community, we need to find people who truly represent the views of the community. To do this, you need to understand community dynamics and power structures, and we need to be sure that marginalized groups have a voice. This can be particularly challenging in urban contexts, but we're going to hear more about that from Jackie on some good practices. Number three, communities are well placed to identify their protection challenges, but external partners also have a role. Communities might not recognize protection dangers, or they might deprioritize them. For example, communities may not prioritize activities to prevent and respond to SGBV. So we need to understand their priorities, but at the same time, we need to balance them with our own professional judgment. That's another place where we need to be sure that marginalized groups have a voice in identifying protection risks, because leaders may not necessarily appropriately represent marginalized groups' views. Number four, effective protection interventions require accurate diagnosis. To understand the problems and the community's capacity to deal with them, we need to spend time with the communities. We need to use participatory methodology, and then we need to mold our programs to their concerns. That's also a key to our accountability to affected populations. If we're not assessing the problems correctly with the community, then we're not able to build responsive programs that are effective. Number five, communities already employ protection measures. The communities know the threats that they face, and they do what they can to protect themselves. So our protection interventions need to support the measures that they're already undertaking and be sure we don't undermine those measures. But we also need to be aware that sometimes communities undertake harmful coping mechanisms, so we need to find a way to try to replace those. Number six, community work requires expertise and training. We need protection expertise, but we also need strong facilitation and consensus building skills and social work skills. We're talking about a skill set that's a mix between UNHCR's protection and community services profiles, and we know that in many cases we already have those staff working in the field. The most important thing is that the staff that are working in the field are respectful, empathetic, and non-judgmental. Number seven, we need supportive supervision. Without having the buy-in of senior management and supervisors, this kind of work is really difficult to initiate and to sustain. Senior management and supervisors must, for example, request and allocate funds and commit sufficient staff time to work with communities, which, as I pointed out at the beginning, is a long and involved commitment. We also need a focus on protection. This is really linked very closely to number 3. It's not always easy to draw the line between protection and non-protection issues. Some things may end up being slightly more development than they are protection, for example, because everything is so intertwined. But I think that the most urgent protection needs will be clear, and they always have to be prioritized. Number 9, we need to promote sustainability from the very start. Refugees, as well as humanitarian actors, often focus on the temporary nature of the emergency, but the reality is that displacement generally lasts much longer. So a strong sense of community ownership in protection work will help to make it not only more sustainable, but more effective. And we need to balance the need to provide assistance with the need to hand over responsibility to communities and local institutions. Number 10, we need to support and work with existing communities and national structures. At the outset, we need to map services that exist and which refugees can or should be able to access. We should support those and not create parallel systems. But we need to remember that certain groups within the population might not have equal access to those national structures. So it's important that we, again, apply an age, gender, and diversity lens. It's also important that we support the local structures so that we avoid inequity with host communities and possible tensions that can create. This is particularly important in urban contexts. Number 11, we need to develop an advocacy strategy for sustainable change. Long-term improvements in the lives of refugees will require systemic change. So we need to support communities so that they know their rights and they know the avenues through which they can achieve them. And we need to work together with them to advocate both at local level and national level. We, the humanitarian actors, can open doors for them, but in the end, the arguments will be stronger coming directly from the affected people. And finally, we need to give attention to evaluation and reporting. We all need to do a better job, I think, of setting indicators and outcomes for our community-based protection work so that the results can be measured and reported. This can help make a stronger case for continued work with communities. And most importantly, we're accountable to the communities that we serve. So we need to include them in the evaluation of our work, and we need to adjust our programs in response to their feedback. So now let me just shift and try to pull this back towards the UNHCR Urban Refugee Policy and a few challenges it sets out, and also some responses, all of which relate closely to community-based protection. First, it can be difficult to identify the urban refugees in their communities. Often, refugees will use anonymity as a self-protection mechanism. They may not want to be identified, or they might be isolated and not part of any community at all. Refugees in urban areas also can have difficulty accessing us. That could be because of the cost of transport to get across town to find our offices, or because of security issues when they go outside. For example, in many places, LGBTI people would face violence in traveling around town. Or it could be about mobility issues, for example, with people with disabilities. Or there could be cultural or family issues that prevent them from approaching us, for example, certain limitations on women and girls movement. And they may simply lack the information about humanitarian agencies and what we may or may not be able to do. And we're also limited in our ability to cover all of the needs of urban refugees, and closely linked to this is the fact that refugees might have unrealistic expectations of what humanitarian actors can do. This can in turn lead to frustration and misunderstandings which can lead to security issues. So we need to maintain continuous dialogue with refugees. We need to reach out with regular information for them, and also to the host communities. Our support to urban refugees, if not done properly, can lead to inequality and tensions with host communities. This can also lead to insecurity. And some responses that are community-based protection work, but also drawn from UNHCR's urban policy. First, we have participation, which is critical, and I think I've already emphasized that throughout. But we need to ensure that refugees can participate, and not just at the assessment phase. We need to have refugees participate throughout the program cycle. We also need to do a lot better with outreach. For example, we need to build up teams of refugee outreach volunteers. We'll hear more again from Jackie on this as well. We need to expand and improve two-way communication and referral systems. We need to maintain clear and consistent dialogue with the refugee population and the host community. Information itself is empowering, but also sharing and receiving information with refugees is critical to our accountability to them. Plus, it can help to manage expectations and dispel rumors. We need to support refugee associations. They can help to rebuild social networks and support mechanisms that displacement has torn apart. Associations can facilitate and lead cultural, social, recreational activities for refugees. And we also need to encourage refugee support groups, ways that refugees can help each other to deal with difficult issues, child protection issues, SGBV issues, mental health and psychosocial needs, for example. In all of this, partnerships are critical. Connecting with urban refugee communities is really difficult because they're scattered across sprawling cities, but also because of the poverty and the fragile housing arrangements, they're often forced to move. So we rely heavily on partnerships for outreach, and we need to do a better job of reaching out to non-traditional partners. For example, we need to partner with national organizations of people with disabilities or with groups that support LGBTI people. We also need to advocate for refugees to have access to national programs and services, as I mentioned before, for example, healthcare and education. Often the local capacities are already overstretched. The host communities may already be suffering, so we need to find ways to support them. But we need to avoid parallel systems as much as possible, and we don't want separate services for displaced communities. It's not only inefficient, but it can serve to further marginalize them, and it often creates inequalities that create tensions. Plus, our contributions to national services will remain after the refugees have left, so that will be a lasting benefit to the host community. I think that I will leave it there for now. We'll have more time to talk after Jackie presents. What I've put up on the screen are some of UNHCR's guidance materials that I've referenced. They're all available on RefWorld, and also there's links to them on our website. So I hope that you are able to access those and make use of them. And I think at this point, we can turn back over to Attila and then to Jackie.
Thank you, Scott, for the extensive introduction to the topic. And let me just apologize from everyone about the audio notifications. This is a sound which the system gives when someone new joins the course. But again, it's a notification, it's an indication that the theme is very, very popular. I think we are over 100, so it's a great crowd. But I hope that everyone is now connected, so we will not hear any new notifications. In any case, I'm handing over the presenter's rights to Jackie. And unmuting Jackie. Jackie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, Jackie. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Lu from ICMC Malaysia. My colleague, Santa and Wang, are here as well. Hi. So it's indeed our honor to be invited as a case study to UNHCR's community-based protection approach. And we are all very excited to share with you our community-based approach to prevent and combat gender-based violence amongst the Burmese refugees in Malaysia. Without further ado, I would first like to show you a very short animation which will give you an idea of how one of the cores of our CBT works. I hope it works. If it doesn't work, please let me know. I need to re-upload again. Okay, I'm going to play it. I hope you can see it. If you can't, and if it's not smooth, don't worry. We'll make the linkage later. Okay, I hope you can see the video, and I hope it gives you an idea of how our outreach works. Okay, how do I do this? So, sorry. Attila, can I check, does it go into a PowerPoint mode?
Jackie, can you come again, please?
Yeah, this is a PowerPoint, right? But because it shows all the overlapping animation. Does it show animation? How do I do that?
No, it doesn't show animation, just your screens here.
Ah, okay. Okay, it's fine. Yeah, we'll carry on. Okay, so as you can see, the group of RWPC, we call it the Refugee Women's Protection Corps. They are at the forefront and playing a leading role in implementing the key program activities. So this is the RWPC that we have, as you can see from the slide. So the best practice here, I would like to quote what Scott just said. CBP is a process. It's not a project. It takes a lot of time in training and capacity building, regular monitoring, and most importantly, is to develop trust. So how do we put the capacity of refugees at the center of GBV programming? As you know, gender-based violence is a very personal, very cultural specific amongst the Burmese refugee communities. As outsiders, we would not have been accepted into their centers and schools. Our message would not have been fully appropriate. We would not have been trusted enough for a woman to call in on an emergency hotline to say, in her dialect, "Help, my husband is beating me." For these reasons, we started the Refugee Women's Protection Corps, the RWPC, at the same time as we started the program 5 years ago. We have grown from there. We now have a total of 15 women and 7 men as the RWPC member. And now they are part and parcel of every program element. ICMC program in Malaysia is based on 3 foundational aspects. Number 1, prevention. Number 2, emergency response. Number 3, sub-grants to the refugee community-based organization. We call it the mini-grant. Each of these has an element of community-based protection. Let's start with GBV prevention. The RWPC conducts awareness-raising sessions in homes, religious centers, community centers, basically everywhere and anywhere the refugees communities gather. So they also conduct personal safety training. Okay, sorry, this is how community training looks like. So I hope you can you hear me now? Okay. So they also conduct personal safety training in refugee learning centers for children 8 to 12 years of age. We call it the Children Safety Program, which teach about child's rights and responsibilities, safe and unsafe touches, how to say no. At the end of the training, they are given a coloring book, which you can easily download from the urbangoodpractices.org. In addition, the trained RWPC also conducts a specific GBV training for teenagers between 13 to 17 years old. We discuss with young people about respect and relationship with the opposite sex. So these are the 3 main trainings conducted by the RWPC members. So how do we organize the outreach to a widely spread refugee community? It's too bad that it doesn't have animation. I didn't know that, but it's blocking your view. So we started with collaboration with the community-based organization leaders with the support of UNHCR in order to gather contacts addressed from their community members. The RWPC will then visit the houses and ask for permission to conduct awareness sessions. We also depend heavily on word of mouth to get further contacts. As you can see from the PowerPoint, to the extent possible, ICMC staff will visit the community together with the RWPC. So I would like to quote the UNHCR protection policy paper. The time spent on developing trust, understanding, and capacity should not be considered separate from the real work of implementation. Time is very important for a successful CBP approach. So now, all of our 18 to 20 RWPC members have taken the leadership in planning the outreach activities for the month. They do it on their own. They will write down the location, the training, the community group which they are going to visit and conduct for a particular month. So in the next slide, you can see by the end of the day, we'll get the full plan. Each of the magnet with initials, different initials represents the member of our RWPC. So you can see we have children's training in May, youth training, leukemia house visit, community training, as well as sport and interpretation for play therapy. So in each of the house or community visits, they will collect attendance, distribute handouts, hotline numbers, peer counseling numbers, and write the report after the training. Reporting is very important. We emphasize a lot on the accuracy of reporting. So how was the detection concern as GBV identified? Which is my second point, response to GBV. The participants may disclose the abuse they faced during the house visit upon hearing the information, or they may call the hotline, or they may choose to speak to our RWPC. So now, I would like to have our senior RWPC member, Xian Wang, to take over from here.
Hi everyone, my name is Xian Wang. I'm a senior RWPC and I have joined ICMC since year 2012. As mentioned by Jackie, ICMC has 2 hotlines and they both operate every day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. One hotline is for GBV disclosure and another one is for care counseling. The disclosure hotline phone is protected among RWPC members on a weekly basis. We can only hold the hotline after mastering SGBV training and after receiving internal training on answering hotline from ICMC officers. Upon receiving a call, then RWPC members would usually begin the conversation by saying the following: "Hello, ICMC hotline, how may I help you?" The RWPC would then inform the caller that they would be called back to save their phone credit. If the call is in regard to GBV disclosure, we proceed by using the disclosure form as a guide. Necessary information regarding the survivor is collected, such as their name, age, ethnicity, whether or not they are registered, if they are a minor, and so on. We also ask if the survivor is in imminent risk or danger to know if it is an emergency case. For example, we would ask if they are in a safe place or if they are injured and need immediate medical attention. In case of an emergency, we usually inform the survivor that we will contact the ICMC officer immediately and will call the survivor back to give further instruction or advice on what they should do. For instance, want to come to ICMC or UN compound, or if we should contact community-based organization leaders immediately. It is important for us RWPC to note down the details of the incident which has been provided by the survivor and use the exact words and sentences when filling up the disclosure form. The form then needs to be submitted to the ICMC officer as soon as possible. If the survivor is not sure of their need and are not ready to report, we inform them that there is a peer counseling service that can be offered. So we then provide them with the peer counseling hotline number. A peer counselor will call the survivor and provide initial peer counseling service. Additionally, all of us are trained to escort survivor to community clinic, private clinic, hospital, shelters, and counseling centers as needed. Besides that, we also provide interpretation services to the survivors and the children. We believe that the best practices when attending to hotline, all call needs to be attended immediately or to return calls the very next day if the call was made after 9 p.m. I would like to quote the UNHCR policy paper that states, "Trust will be enhanced if the same peoples are regularly involved and what they say to the community is consistent." Beneficiaries feel a sense of trust and security when they are able to share the traumatic experiences to the other RWPC members who have similar cultural background and speak the same native language as them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Wang. Okay, take over from here. So to add on what Wang has just said, ICMC also offers services such as emergency shelter, professional counseling, including play therapy, professional counseling for men, perpetrator, and family counseling. We also provide emergency cash and material assistance to extremely vulnerable GBV survivors. Priority is given to those who are not registered with UNHCR. So through this community-based approach, ICMC has developed trust, confidence, knowledge, and capacity with the RWTC. We're also very happy to learn that UNHCR told U.S. State Department evaluators that ICMC has such a phenomenal relationship with the community that they are often our eyes and ears on the ground. They sit down and build a strong relationships and trust with them. Now, I would like to invite our Senior Community Services Coordinator, Santa Galusani, to give a short presentation on the third component, the mini grant.
Hi everyone, I'm Santa and I'm happy to speak to you today about the ICMC mini grant. ICMC funds refugee community organizations to operate community-based activities designed to prevent, combat, and respond to gender-based violence. ICMC has successfully funded long-term projects such as women's support centers and livelihood projects to assist survivors of GBV and even a transitional home as an emergency response. ICMC has also funded several short-term or event-based projects such as art and drama competitions for children and sports activities in order to create awareness on GBV and reinforce gender equality and respect. The projects have served to be valuable in that they are community efforts to respond and combat to GBV. Now, how did we reach out to the community? UNHCR has been very helpful, and at the beginning, we were invited to join the Social Protection Fund in regular meetings with community-based organizations. This gave us a chance to introduce our program and reach out to the main organizations. Through this platform, we were able to obtain contacts of communities who were interested to learn more about our program. From then onwards, ICMC has been reaching out to establish its own link through meetings with community leaders and women's groups. ICMC also takes opportunity and makes representation at functions and programs organized by the community to build a stronger relationship with the community and in order to gain their trust. The best practice to build a strong relationship with the community, as quoted on the UNHCR Protection Policy paper, is to get to know the community well. This will enable you to identify community groups and associations that are trusted and should be involved in arrangements for community representation or program implementation. Now, the biggest challenge for this component was to get the community buy-in, as most communities tend to prioritize other needs rather than GBV. I would like to share a successful example that comprises of challenges and how we overcame it. The Rohingya groups, as you might already know, has an even more pronounced gender role which extremely disempowers women who have to submit to males, not only their spouses, but other family members as well. It was especially difficult to reach out or get the buy-in from the Rohingya community. The leader was not interested in GBV at all, and he did not believe that having a mini grant project will help the community. We then obtained a Rohingya female contact from STF, and finally we started our first Rohingya Women's Support Center at Klang, which is in the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, and had successfully assisted 36 GBV survivors. But we did not give up on pursuing a similar support center in Kuala Lumpur. Hence, we approached the male leader again and showed him the number of cases we received from the Rohingya community and the assistance which the Klang Center had successfully provided. Upon witnessing the success of the Klang Women's Support Center, he finally agreed to set up a similar project site in Kuala Lumpur, where a larger population of Rohingya members reside. As seen, the slide shows several meetings were held between the Rohingya Society in Malaysia, the coordinators, and ICMC to facilitate the project. This was a great achievement in that the community was now willing to recognize that GBV was prevalent within the community, and most importantly, their willingness to address the situation. The best practice here is to recognize that engagement may be a slow process requiring patience and respect for the community's own pace of change. Since its implementation, the project has been a stepping stone to the community for having a women's group and for the first time ever having women members working in the same office. As the slide shows, the support center is located at the office of the Rohingya Society, Malaysia. I'm happy to say that the project has not only empowered and encouraged women participation and leadership, but has also been able to focus on the gender superiority of men. Through organizing GBV workshops and perpetrator counseling for men, the project has encouraged changing male attitudes towards physical abuse and psychological control, which are very common practices within the Rohingya community. One other example I would like to mention to you is the initiative and progress of the Women Working Committee. From what started as an effort by ICMC to empower the Rohingya women, now there's initiatives within the women themselves to widen and strengthen their network in an effort to combat GBV. I'm glad to say that women have also greatly progressed and now are willing to travel to neighboring states and as far as Penang to facilitate the project activities, including setting up GBV workshops, identifying GBV cases, and escorting them to Kuala Lumpur for the purpose of reporting and placing them in shelter. The slide shows pictures from our first mini-grant project in Penang, where ICMC collaborated with a Rohingya school to raise awareness among children through an art competition. In short, I would like to highlight that the mini-grant projects that are community-based approaches not only empower and benefit the survivors of GBV and their children, but on a larger scale, the community as well. I hope I have been able to give you some insight on the mini-grant. Thank you. Back to you, Jackie.
Okay, back to me. I think some participants have unmuted themselves. I can hear noises coming in. Anyway, I will continue. I hope you can hear me. So that we are almost. In fact, I would like to speak about. Atila, I think do you need to mute some of them? Should I continue? Okay. So the first challenge is it takes time. Building the capacity of refugees to take lead takes a lot of time. When we started our project, we had 18 women refugee members who came from different Burmese ethnicities, each with their own culture, views on gender roles, and many of them had minimal working experience. So what do we need to do? We had to first understand the community context, their dynamic, their culture, and the challenges they face. As a refugee and as a woman who has fled to Malaysia, we have to always remember to place ourselves in their shoes and at the same time instill a sense of responsibility and ownership in them so that they can conduct the outreach work. Second challenge, it's not a one-off effort. The approach is a continuous one in order to remain alive. Although ICMC provides tools, training for RWPC to build their knowledge in order to ensure the information is accurately delivered, the staff have to invest a lot of time in conducting regular monitoring, refreshers, and intense debriefing sessions. Staff regular coaching and support enhances the members' understanding, knowledge, and confidence in taking up the important responsibilities. When they feel trusted and when they gain ownership in their work, they're motivated to gradually take over more and more responsibility. And it is always good to train up some senior members so that they can help you to mentor the junior. And the third challenge, departure of senior experienced members due to resettlement. We're very happy for them, but we have to start all over again. Number 4, we need to adapt to changing community conditions. For example, we just opened a new office in Penang, northern part of Malaysia. We learned very quickly from our RWPC that the public transportation options are very, very limited, and it requires the RWPC to travel long distances by foot, which has proven to be very dangerous, because 2 of our RWPC members are yet to be registered with UNHCR, although they are holding community card with the Rohingya Society in Malaysia. But this document is not sufficient to prevent them from being harassed or detained by the police or immigration officer. Besides that, if you get to see the animation, you will be able to tell that traveling from Penang Island to mainland, you have to use a ferry. And using ferry is very risky because there are presence of immigration officers on board, and they would generally check on passengers' documentation. So if we had done nothing, we would not been able to conduct our work with a community-based approach, because we could not have recruited or retained any members. So this is what we did. The Penang coordinator has to adopt additional safety and precautionary measures by having the RWPC to call her or to inform her as soon as they hear news or rumors about an immigration crackdown or police raids. She will then postpone the outreach activity. She has also made necessary adjustments by reducing the number of houses. Because, for example, we need to reach 3 houses a day, she may reduce it to 2 or 1. We have also recently engaged a transport company in order to have a contracted driver to pick up and to drop off our RWPC member at the vaccinated location to minimize the risk, as well as to alleviate their worries. Number 5, burnout, especially among the peer counselor and those who are listening to the hotline over and over again. This can be a side effect of community-based programs. So we have learned to have regular conversations with our refugees workers in order to identify symptoms or signs of burnout. We also organize some simple activities such as movie day in office, a day outing, or sports activity. You can see taking a break after one house visit, and Bastian Wang, he spoke just now. So experience also told that listening to the RWPC members, yes, you might not be able to help them to solve all their problems, but by listening attentively, they will feel empathized and empowered. But again, this takes time. So we have mentioned how UNHCR supports us in many aspects. So this is just a simple flowchart on referral mechanism when it comes to STBD incidents. As you can see the highlighted part, this is from ICMC to the Outreach Protection and Intervention Unit in UNHCR Malaysia. So we refer to UNHCR when survivor requests UN support, such as lodging a police report, legal counseling, legal intervention, perpetrator intervention. So we also support UNHCR when they refer cases to ICMC, if survivor is in need of shelter, counseling, or emergency funds. And we will then work together with UNHCR to work on the discharge plan when time is appropriate. So in conclusion, we would like to thank UNHCR for this continuous support and understanding. And community-based approach takes more time, and it is slower to build, very, very slow. But once it is there, it is sustainable. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Attila. Back to you.
Thank you, Jackie, and all the other colleagues at your end for the interesting presentation. Now, I would like to open the floor for any questions. So if you'd like to ask something from the presenters, please use the hand icon so we can see that you want to talk to us, and then I will unmute you. Yes, I see. Hassan, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you a bit low, so please try to speak up, and I think we will hear you.
Okay, thank you. I have a question to Scott regarding the community-based approach.
Hassan, I'm sorry, but it's very, very low. Your voice is very, very low. Can you lean closer to the microphone, or perhaps if it doesn't work, just put your question in the chat box.
Okay. Is it clearer now?
Now it's better, much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just it's a comment regarding to Scott for regarding the community-based protection approach, the right-based approach, and the participatory approach. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
And once you finish, I will mute Scott.
Yeah. When it comes to implementation, even in our context, I think there is no clear line between these three approaches. It mixed when it comes to implementation in urban context. So how do you perceive this comment?
Scott, floor is yours.
No, I would just say that I fully agree with Hassan, not just in urban context, but everywhere we work. These approaches are things that we need to be doing simultaneously. They support each other, they reinforce each other, and we need to apply all of those in all opportunities that we have in working with people of concern.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.
Thank you. Erica, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but the floor is yours.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. We hear you well.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to, sorry, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, I would like to ask now the response, the community-based approach policies and the urban program, the outreach program activities, how we are going to basically practically, set up this outreach program vis-a-vis, the spatial distribution of the population within the urban program, where people in our context, for instance, from Ethiopia, people are living in very scattered places of the urban, cities. So how it could be, practical to reach out those refugees in the urban context. Hello.
Thank you for the question. Jackie, I think the question is for you, so please, can you?
Yeah, I can hear, but it was quite bad. Yeah, not very clear. But I think he asked how
can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? In the urban, the community-based approach protection policy, it has been indicated that outreach activity is one of the priority areas that has to be strengthened. So in the context of urban area or urban program, especially here in Ethiopia, refugees are living in a very scattered places. How it could be practical, to reach out those refugees, if we are thinking about the outreach program. I believe that there should be an outreach program, but how we are, basically reach out those refugees where refugees are living in a very scattered places in urban program, especially in the big cities.
Jackie, I think
Hello?
the voice was more clear now. So can you please comment on the question? Thank you.
Yeah. I think basically what you need to do is you first need to know where they are, if they are scattered. I don't know if Ethiopia it's very scattered, because Penang, the one that we mentioned just now, that we recently started our program, that it's a huge place and they are very scattered. So what we need to do is, but first of all, you have to have your community workers. You have to have your 3 community workers, and then you have to map where the refugees are, and then the majority of where they are. But if you have the few community workers with you, you can start from where they live. because where they live will have houses and I think other refugees people. So yes. So once you start, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Hello.
Jackie, no, thank you. I think we can, if you allow, we can move on to the next question because we have a lot of hands up.
Okay.
Joanne Irvine?
Yes.
Joanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this question is more addressed to Scott. Well, sorry, first of all, thank you very much for the really interesting presentations. My name is Joanne, and I actually work more in the development field. I work for the Joint Migration and Development Initiative of the UNDP. And I just was interested in, when you were speaking, Scott, about the key principles of community-based protection, and you mentioned the focus on protection is not easy to draw the line between protection and non-protection issues, and that some issues are more related to development. And that, but at the same time, there is a need to sort of promote sustainability from the start, given that displacement really lasts a lot longer than what is expected. So. And we actually work in the field with local authorities and local actors, helping, well, basically helping local authorities to manage migration in a way that can promote the local development. So I was just wondering. And also, we're seeing more and more that we are working with mixed migration when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers and return migrants and economic migrants. So, just my interest is this line between protection and non-protection issues, and this sort of but this idea to promote sustainability. How does that work really in the field when you work? Do you engage with development actors? Do you do anything sort of more development related? How does that sort of work? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. I believe the question was addressed to Scott. Scott, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Floor is yours.
Joanne, I think I get your question, but maybe we'll have a quick follow-up. But you know, first of all, this is meant to this particular presentation is meant to be talking about community-based protection activities, and the idea was to emphasize that in that particular part that you're talking about, the idea was to emphasize that sometimes the population that you're speaking to, they might prioritize something like, for example, they want more livelihoods opportunities. And at the same time, that's their priority, or at least the representatives that you're speaking with. Young girls are facing sexual and gender-based violence, and young boys are being recruited into the military. So it's not that we wouldn't want people to work on the livelihoods activities, but what we're talking about here is that for community-based protection people, that you focus on the protection things, and you recognize that the population sees a need for more livelihoods, but in terms of protection, you focus squarely on the SCBV and child recruitment, for example. But you're right that there is a bit of maybe a slight contradiction in the sense that, yes, we also need to be talking about sustainability from the very beginning. In this context, when we're talking about sustainability, we're generally talking about basically the more that we're able to build community ownership and buy-in of the communities at the beginning and empower them and develop programs that support things that either they're already doing or skills that they have or concerns that they raise. We see that programming is more sustainable. The results continue on after humanitarian actors stop. And long-term change is more possible if we start off on the right foot at the beginning. So I think, I hope that I've answered your question, but you're welcome to follow up if you wish.
Thank you, Scott. I would like to move on because we have a lot of questions still. Mohammed, floor is yours. Can you hear us? Mohammed Soman?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank both Scott and Jackie, as well as her team, for their excellent presentation. I work, by the way, in UNHCR office in Malaysia. We work very closely also with Jackie and her team, and I would like to congratulate them on their very good work with the GPV project. I just have like a question which basically in line with what Juan had just asked Scott regarding the sustainability aspect of, and like basically principle number 9 and principle number 11 as well, which is linked to the advocacy and sustainability for the intervention, the community-based intervention. And linking this to a larger framework of integrated protection activities. Basically, as we know, like these are basically the most, perhaps among the most difficult aspects to achieve in any intervention, whether humanitarian or actually development in nature. And like we will continue to have this quest for quite some time for now. But how basically my question would be to tackle on sustainability and advocacy related to issues to achieve the sustainable change when we have 2 points or two scenarios. One, like you have a community group who is rather fragmented a little bit. We know that like naturally certain community groups would have a natural tendency to work together, and it would be somewhat a little bit easier to ensure the sustainability. Basically, you direct them, you provide some professional guidance, engage them right from the start, as Scott highlighted, and take care of the intervention with them from that perspective. But some other groups, it would be very difficult for them to continue along that line. Also, like what would you advise in countries where like it's really very difficult to begin with to have any form of interaction with the government? What would be the alternative arrangement to address these issues? Thank you, and once again, thanks for Scott and Jackie for their excellent presentation. Over to you.
Thanks, Mohammed. Jackie or Scott, I don't know who wants to address this question, but floor is yours.
I think I just wonder if you could rephrase that question. I didn't quite get. I know there was 2 parts, and the last part was on the interaction with the government, but I didn't get the beginning part. Could you just try to rephrase?
Certainly. Certainly, Scott. Like basically, I'm talking about like the sustainability intervention when it comes to communities that are rather fragmented, like they don't have a natural tendency to come to work together. They would rather to work as individual instead of like coming together as a community. And the other part of the question would be how you tackle the advocacy strategy aiming at sustainable change with the government counterpart who is not on board with you. If you can just elaborate on this, that would be great. Yeah, thanks a lot, and over to you.
Okay. Yeah, and now I see, and I think those are really good questions, and those are the kinds of things that I think that people are struggling with somewhat regularly. I think on the first question, if we find that certain people or certain populations don't seem to come together as a community, my first thing that I would wonder is that really the community that we're looking at? I mean, you know, we often talk about communities in displacement, but in fact, it's often very artificial the way that people end up, where they end up, and with who they end up in displacement. It could be in certain cases that people are not with, they basically are isolated and they're not linked with a community, whereas other refugee populations maybe moved together, or they have pulled people along with them over time, and they've got a very strong community. So I think here we're talking about those where we're able to kind of build on something. I think that there's certain groups that purposely for their own protection, they wish to not associate with others. They want to remain hidden and kind of out of sight. And that raises really difficult questions. But I think the only way that we can attempt to even identify those groups or those individuals and to reach them is through building strong partnerships and for looking for partnerships maybe outside of the places where we usually have them. We need to, for example, look for possibly religious organizations or certain types of special interest groups, all of which might be able to help us to find people. And it could be the fact that once we identify these populations, that they kind of will create a new community that didn't exist before. But if you want, we can also, if you give me a more concrete example on how that works, it would also be interesting to hear from your side what that challenge is. And then when it comes to the government, obviously, I mean, of course, we're always struggling to make inroads with government partners. But I think that there's always opportunities. And if the government, for example, at the national level has policies or has practices that make it difficult for refugees to gain access to programs, or if they make it difficult for us to advocate on behalf of refugees or refugees to advocate on behalf of themselves, I guess what we need to do is focus maybe more in that case at the local level or at some regional level. And I think we need to, just like we build partnerships with NGOs or any others, I think we really need to look for strong allies in government. And it really comes down to, I think, it comes down to individuals. And I know that we can always find individuals that are sympathetic to what we're doing and sympathetic to refugees. And I think we have to just chip away at it as much as possible. Sorry, that's not a totally satisfactory answer, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Scott. I would like to read out some questions from the chat box first. Robert Atala, a question for Scott. How can we share targeting information without allowing communities to adapt itself to these criteria? My question, Robert's question relates to services like cash or livelihood services targeting. Scott.
Well, in my view, what you would want to do in that case is you want to share general information with people so that they have a general idea of what's available and why we've made decisions that we've made. We obviously don't want to share with populations the criteria themselves. In addition, we need to have robust beneficiary selection processes that are able to kind of identify from within the various people those that shall be prioritized and those that maybe for one reason or another we believe have just adapted themselves or adapted their case in one way or another to meet what they believe to be the criteria. That's not much different. In fact, it's a simpler version of what we do, for example, in RSD processes. So it's the kind of work that UNHCR has the skill to do, although it may lie more within RSD or resettlement professionals. But again, the main point is that we can't be non-transparent, and we can't expect refugees to understand why we make certain choices if we're not informing them to at least a very general level as to the people or the kind of people that we're targeting and the general reasons why.
Thank you, Scott. Melanie asked whether the copies of the presentations will be shared. I think it will be shared along with a copy of this WebEx as we are recording it. Now, Viniti Mehra is asking, how do you measure the impact of the interventions with the community-based approach? This is the next question.
That's also an excellent question, and I think that what we need to do first is we need to think about the think about what are we trying to achieve through our work. And if what we're trying to achieve, for example, is to ensure that our protection programming is inclusive of people with disabilities and is equally accessible by them, then we can come up with indicators that would measure the baseline currently of the level of participation of people with disabilities. And it's relatively easy at that point then to measure over a year and another year and another year the increase in participation by people with disabilities. You can also look at the concrete work that's being done, or the concrete assistance that is coming out of your changes to your programming. For example, are there more children with disabilities that are entering the public or the school system, or have there been some sort of changes in terms of physical access to facilities? So those things are easily measurable. But I think that you're drawing out a really important and difficult line, which is a lot of protection work, not just community-based protection work, is difficult to measure, and we need to. We've got people here in Geneva that are developing more and more ways that we're able to measure protection work, and I think we need to do a better job of linking up with our program colleagues, at least for UNHCR staff, and working in multifunctional teams where we bring together people who have different skill sets than just protection, and we learn from them, and we harness their skills to help us. Because I think oftentimes protection people, community-based protection people, it's not necessarily a comfortable place for us to be working with indicators and measuring protection, but we need to do that in a better way. And UNHCR has the skills, at least within the organization, so I think we need to do a better job of cross-functional exchange of information and support.
Thank you, Scott. Melanie from Peshawar, actually 5 people over there, so they have some questions. Melanie, I just unmuted you. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We're a group of 5 from Peshawar. We just have a few questions, so I'll go around each person. They can introduce themselves and just ask the question.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for this nice presentation. I'm Muzaffar Khan, is working with Protection Associate at UNHCR Peshawar. My question is that most operations, basically they focus on strengthening the mechanism, protection mechanism in the country of asylum. But what my question is that what if this strengthening mechanism would not lead to the demotivation factor of at some stage for the return of refugees? Because when we talk about particularly about the Pakistan operations, so our priority over here is to promote voluntary return of the people rather than strengthening the protection mechanism within this particular operation. Thank you.
Jackie, Scott, anyone wants to address this question?
Scott.
Yeah, let me see if I understand your question correctly. You're saying that there's a danger in strengthening community structures because what that could do is sort of anchor the people in the place of displacement and discourage them from returning. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I don't think that the two things are mutually exclusive. I think that people need protection while in displacement. They need communities that are supportive and communities that are able to create a safe environment and an environment in which they're able to access their rights, in which they're supported by the community to access their rights. And they also need durable solutions. And people will return, people make choices all the time about if they wish to move or they wish to stay. And they made a choice to enter the country where you're working at some point because they felt that that was the best thing for their lives. And at some point they're going to make a choice whether or not they're going to go back or they're going to stay permanently, or, I mean, I don't know the legal context there. But I don't think that we should think that in order to encourage people to return, we want their situation in the place of displacement to be uncomfortable, or for them not to have a protective environment where they are, and to, in a sense, push them to return. I think we need to do both at the same time. We need to strengthen the protection where the people are, and we need to give them the information that they need that allows them to make a fully informed and consensual choice to return if that's what we think is appropriate, and let them make that decision in the end.
Thank you. Melanie, you mentioned that there are other questions at your end also. Please go ahead if you still have more questions.
Yes, thank you. Just one more question. I'll get the person to introduce herself and give an answer.
Yes. I'm Ali Hassan, Community Services Associate. I just wanted to ask that in urban refugee setup, it's very difficult to maintain the sustainability factor in the program. So if we are working in the community services and we want to sustain the interventions, the structures we are introducing, the support we are giving to structures, community structures, and we want to sustain that structure. It becomes very difficult. So how can we tackle that issue? Thank you.
I'm not sure if we hear you correctly. Can you repeat the last few lines?
Okay, no problem. I wanted to ask that in urban refugee setup, it's very difficult to maintain the sustainability of programs. So if you strengthen the community structures, it is very difficult to sustain them, because the migration, the movement from one place to another of the refugees. So how we can tackle this issue?
Okay, yeah. I think, thank you for your question. What we do here, sustainability is an issue for program, especially for our mini grant project. I think ongoing mentoring and monitoring is very important, and we have to always remind them that they have to find out ways to sustain their program by sorting out resources, additional resources with them. We can work with churches, other NGOs, to help them to sustain their program. We have only, I think we have one program, livelihood, that was it's sustainable, two of them. Anta, would you like to say a bit?
We've had, although not, we've had several projects running in the past years, but at least two projects are successfully sustainable after we stopped funding them. And we noticed that the amount of training that we have provided and the help that we have provided to the community is able to teach them how to run the project on their own. They may have changed the project itself a little bit to adapt to their individual needs, but it carried on. So those were really successful, very, very successful projects. But saying that the projects that did not continue were also somehow they did come back to ICMC for refunding and to continue for the running of the project. So it can happen that way as well. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. Madhav Raj Balbaz, I see your hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to thank Scott and Jackie and our team for excellent presentation. My question is to Scott about the challenges that UNHCR and other partners face in terms of providing protection and assistance and solutions. In the context, for example, in Jakarta or Indonesia, where refugees are not allowed to involve in any income generation activities, livelihood activities legally. On top of that, the country itself is a migrant worker sending country to neighboring countries, meaning there is less opportunity for the jobs or other ways of engaging in livelihood activities. And there are very limited partners involved in providing protection and assistance to refugees, and government priority is not to provide assistance to refugees and asylum seekers, whereas refugees come with very limited resources, and once their means is over, they end up into detention centers, self-report detention center, including women and children, just to meet the basic needs, for example, food, shelter, or health care. So I would be grateful if Scott can advise us on how to deal with such situation. Over to you, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I know a bit about the situation there, and this webinar is certainly not going to solve all of those problems. I mean, that is part of a major migration flow and a much bigger problem than just a community-based protection problem. Obviously, there's a lot of work going on at very senior levels in terms of advocacy and such with the government there, and that's really important. But what I would say is that even in places where refugees are not able to work legally, we find that refugees are doing something in order to either supplement whatever kind of assistance is provided to them, or to actually make a living on their own. So that is happening, and I know that it's not an easy thing to figure out, but I think that we can sometimes find ways in which we're able to support refugees to support themselves, even in really restrictive environments that you're talking about. And the other thing I would say, when you say that there's limited partners, I think, again, and I know I've said this a few times, but we need to think outside the box here a lot. We don't, I know there's probably limited partners working with refugees per se, but you may be able to find partners in the country, non-governmental organizations who are working with specific categories of people. For example, Jackie mentioned the organization that's working with Rohingya in Malaysia. You might find people in organizations in Indonesia that are working with people regardless of their citizenship or non-citizenship status in Indonesia. If you find organizations that work with people with disabilities, or organizations made up of people with disabilities, they generally aren't going to ask people what their citizenship is prior to wanting to make a link with them. And UNHCR may have never approached some of these organizations, for example, also faith-based organizations. Oftentimes, they really aren't going to get into the question of whether or not a person is a citizen of the country. And I think we need to look for more of those opportunities. But I do acknowledge that what you're talking about is really difficult. If what you're saying is that detention is better, the conditions in detention are better than the conditions outside, then of course I know you have a lot of things to struggle with. But I think that there are probably ways that we can have sort of bits and pieces that might be able to help refugees there.
Thank you, Scott. Some questions from the chat box. Maren from Nairobi is asking, who was counseling the male SGBV perpetrators, and were there any interferences with legal procedures?
I think the question is for me. The professional counselor, our implementing partners, are providing the perpetrator counseling to the male individual. and we have our trained RWTC to be the interpreter. We don't have any legal issue concern here because, as you know, Malaysia is not the signatory, the 51 signatory. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jackie. Josephine from UNHCR Kampala, Uganda. A question for Scott here. How would you ensure that the rights of LGBTI refugees and asylum seekers are protected in a country of asylum which has passed a homosexuality act?
Sorry, if I heard correctly, you're in Uganda, which obviously we know the situation there is impossibly difficult for LGBTI people. And unfortunately, I think that the only thing that LGBTI people can do to be safe in Uganda, other than leaving Uganda, is to remain hidden. And we don't ever advocate for or encourage people to hide their sexual orientation or gender identity. However, at the same time, there, I believe, is not a lot of opportunity for safety and security for people with different sexual orientations and gender identities to be open about it. I do think that there are opportunities to try to work with partners, and people are working there on the ground in Uganda, and I'm sure you already know those partners that are working there. And LGBTI people, probably like anybody else, are able to find their own avenues through which they're able to build networks and try to find support. But there's a few places in the world, or actually more than a few places in the world, where it's simply not safe for LGBTI people to be open about their sexual orientation and gender identity, and there's not a good answer for how they can be safe. What we do advocate for is that governments, not only neighboring governments, but governments globally, recognize that your LGBTI status or the perception of your LGBTI status and persecution based on that is a ground for, can be a valid ground for asylum. And it's not a very satisfactory answer, once again, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Scott. Georgi, hi from the other end of Danube. You put a big comment in the chat box. Can you perhaps summarize just in 1 or 2 sentences? I don't want to read out as it's a relatively long piece of text. Please, Georgi, can you hear me? Georgi, are you there? Okay, Georgi doesn't really have audio apparently. So I will just go to let me see. Khalid in the chat box mentions how to use incentives for community-based members, how to motivate them to ensure sustainability.
Hello?
Scott,
Yes.
Jackie, anyone?
Okay. How to motivate them? I think a very useful method is to have different levels, to have an internal promotion system where, like ICMC, we have 3 levels. We have regular 1, regular 2, and the senior. So different levels come with different responsibilities and different incentives, of course. So I think these will motivate them to work harder. And of course, time to time, if you organize some activities and you speak to them, have some teamwork activity will be good, and you can foster them. You can foster and nurse the ownership and instill, I think, confidence in them.
Maybe I'll also just jump in quickly here. That's a really important point. I mean, we need to remember, and I think we often forget this, that anything that we ask refugees or IDPs to do, to volunteer for, or even to attend meetings, or even to come to some of our events or whatever, anytime that we ask of them to come is time that they're not either with their families, which can create protection issues, or working or doing whatever they do to support themselves. And I know that payment is often, or almost always, not something that we look at, but I think there's a lot of ways that we can encourage people. And there's small things that have been done in some places. For example, giving people a mobile phone and a SIM card with a limited amount of funds, which is largely only for the purpose of the work that they're doing, but it also gives them at least a little bit of recognition. And another thing that we need to remember, I think, and we've seen this in a few different places, is that the outreach volunteers, in many cases, are motivated by what they're actually getting out of the project on their own. And many people report that while working to help other refugees, it's helping them with their own sort of, I don't know, we could call it psychosocial concerns. It also empowers them. It makes people feel that they're helping and that they're useful in their community. And I think that there are knock-on effects to that, which kind of people are able to empower their community a little bit more by being empowered themselves. And if they feel pride in the work that they're doing, in many cases, people have said that makes it worth it for them. But I do think we need to look for innovative ways to encourage people and to recognize that they really do have constraints, and they're doing, in a way, they're doing things for us, and they deserve some kind of recognition, if not compensation.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may. Yes, sorry.
Sure, Jackie,
yeah, because I think Scott has raised very good points. Because our workers, they're outreach workers, so the care from staff will definitely motivate them as well. So not only regular conversation, we have given them umbrella because they walk under the sun and in the rain, something small, maybe a backpack and a phone, definitely. We don't give phone, we have subsidized for their phone card bill, and to make sure their safety wherever they go, we give them a pass, we call them, and we allow them to access to us directly. So being transparent and treat them equal, I think that motivates them the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Vincent Parker, I see your hand. Please feel free to talk. Vincent, are you there? Okay, Vincent doesn't have a microphone apparently. So Vincent, if you hear me, just put your question in the chat box and I will read it out. Next in the chat box is Amoding, a question for Scott. Can you identify some of the main protection concerns for all the refugees in urban areas?
Some common trends that we see in urban areas that are protection risks. For example, in many urban areas, women and girls, but also men and boys to a certain extent, face sexual and gender-based violence just by being out on the streets. And cities are often, in many cases, more dangerous in that respect. Other things related to, for example, if you don't have a legal status, like one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, you're susceptible to being detained, and we all know that oftentimes abuses happen within detention facilities by authorities. If not physical, then things related to having to pay your way out and such. Also, if you don't have the right to work, you end up being exploited because you will take any job you can get. People know that they can pay you a lower wage than others. They also know that they can abuse you in other ways, and you're not going to go to the police because if you have no legal status in that area, you have no ability to access justice. We know that there's a myriad of housing issues, and oftentimes refugees have difficulty securing safe and humane housing, and that generally applies in many urban contexts. And then other issues there's a lot of issues related to socioeconomic rights, and it very often is based on legal frameworks in countries. And do refugees have the right, or refugee children have the right to education? And can refugees get health care? And if it is the law that they can get health care, then when they enter a hospital, does the staff actually recognize them and actually give them health care free of charge? They're often sort of money is extorted from them, so things maybe should be free of charge. In other cases, administrative people or hospital staff don't know that refugees should have access to health care or other services that the government offers. Oftentimes language issues or discrimination issues prevent them from accessing things. So that's, I would say, those are some general things, but also, I mean, of course, everything is very context specific, so it's really hard to say across the board.
Thank you, Scott. We've gone pretty much beyond our planned schedule, but we do have some questions still. So if you, Jackie, Scott, if you're still available, there are about 5 more questions. So I would now read out Tom Colley's question. Tom Colley from Khartoum. Tom Colley is asking, do you have any tips or suggestions of good practice when using community volunteers in CBP?
Any tips? Tips, I would say the tips is really invest a lot of time in training them. Training is very, very important. And conducting refreshers and really send your staff out, like personally do the site visits together with your refugee worker. This does not only ensure you to have the quality check, but it will also give your refugee workers sense of confidence when their officers are with them on the field. So, and monitoring visits, I think these are the tips that it's most important for us.
I'll just jump in. Just another thing that comes to mind is I think one thing that you can look at and that's worked in different places is starting off possibly with having volunteers that are dealing with a specific sort of issue. So you could have volunteers that maybe are working in SGBV or volunteers working in other kind of health-related issues. And slowly, based on that, I mean, you can kind of start with what might already exist to a certain level and where you have good buy-in, where you have some strong people already doing something. And then you can build, and slowly you can attach a couple, maybe you can train some volunteers to do a little bit more in terms of psychosocial counseling and support. And then maybe you can pull in some people who maybe can give some, not legal advice, but at least basic advice on how to access the administrative system and what basic rights people have, and then do some referrals. And I think it's important to start with maybe a certain subject area where there's already some capacity and then build around that.
Thank you, Scott. And Jackie, I saw your message that you have a question directly sent to you. Perhaps you can read that out.
Okay, I got a question from Hiba. Hiba based in Egypt. Her question is, she would like to ask what would be the best practice if majority of refugees concentrate on resettlement and refuse to participate at the prevention activities or other outreach activities. So this is a very, very good question because that happened to us as well. So what we did, I don't have magic solution, but we have a tip is we always start off our introductions, we concentrate in, we know they're only concentrating in resettlement, but we will tell them the information that we share will certainly benefit them in the country of asylum. So we explain to them why we not explain to them, sorry, we associate why they need to flee from country, for example, like Myanmar to Malaysia, and they will eventually be resettled, let's say. So before they get resettled, they have to learn information to help them to adapt better. So this is one of the approach that we use. There were times that we also provide certificates of attendance and some token of appreciation, especially when refugees are very scattered. Transport is an issue. We will not be able to reimburse the full amount, but we will reimburse an average amount, maybe $3 to $5, where they can come to the venue to receive the community training. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Carol L. Syed is asking, can you provide concrete examples or good practices of how feedback is provided to the larger community after consultations?
I suppose that's for me. Well, I think Carol might also, I know she's doing great work where she is, and she probably has some good examples there, but there's a few different things I think that we need to look at in terms of feedback to the community. On the one hand, you need sort of mass communication approach or mass communication strategy, and that can be things like information on the obvious things, information on notice boards, information through SMS, information on radio. You can have people driving around with speakers like they do in some places, on either on an ambulance that drives around or on a rickshaw, or depending on the context where you are, and making announcements that way. You can also have, and this is happening in some places, there can be call-in centers where people can call in on a regular basis to access information that's just recorded, and they can select kind of which subjects they want to hear more about, and then there's some things that would just be general information that's provided. At the same time, if you have strong community networks built up, and you believe that you have good representatives of the community that you're working with on a regular basis, it's important to maybe to be sure to spread more detailed messages through the regular people who we're working with within the communities. But that, again, only works as far as we're sure that those people are working in the interest of all of the groups within the community, and that the messages are not going to be in one way or another misused. But I think that with technology, currently there's a lot of different things out there that are being tested related to communicating with communities on a mass scale. And we have some more information maybe that we could share with you on that if you wish.
Thank you, Scott. I am copying the question still unanswered to your chat box. Unfortunately, we are really running short on time now. It's about 2 hours that the session is running, so maybe you can just select the most relevant ones and answer a few more. Scott, just please check your chat box.
We don't have.
Scott, can you hear me?
Sorry, yeah, I'm just trying to, our screen, sorry, I'm just trying to read some of these. Well, let's just, one thing I just saw, I see one question about involvement of host communities. I think there's a lot of space for us to do more with host communities. I think that in many cases, refugees, in most cases, I'm sure, refugees are living within communities where they're not the only, sorry, where they're not the only immigrants. And generally speaking, with maybe a few exceptions, they're amongst those populations of other immigrants, and also living somewhat peacefully in the host communities. But unfortunately, most refugees are living in places that are in countries that themselves are developing. And as much as we can do in terms of supporting the host communities' services and facilities, etc., can improve the relations and can pull the host communities closer to the refugee communities. If we're able, for example, through our assistance programming, to support the, let's say, school system in the area where refugees are living, or to build or to refurbish a clinic, a health clinic in those areas. Those are things that have concrete benefits for host communities and things that will last after the refugees have potentially left, but also are things that the refugees need and are more efficient for us to do through host community and national structures. And the other thing that we can do, and I know this is happening in other places, for example, I think in the outreach program in Cairo, the outreach volunteers are not only from refugee communities, but there's also people from host communities. And it's not only volunteering. At some point, there's, you know, as you move up the hierarchy, people are paid salary positions and working to help refugees in their communities, but also working to help vulnerable host populations. So that's one that I can see quickly. I don't know if Jack can see any others. I'll check through the rest.
No,
thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott. I put the last ones, quite a few there. Just I think just pick one more because we are really running short on time. I believe there will be a follow-up email to this presentation where we will share the contact details of the presenters along with the presentation and the streaming link for this session. And I guess there will be forums in the future on email whatsoever to address some more questions since we are really short now on time. So Scott, if you want to address one more, floor is yours.
Sorry, no, I just read a really good comment from Vincent, and I would only just say that I agree with him. He's saying, I think if I understand correctly, saying that the fact is that when we say community-based protection is a process and not a project, that implies that it needs to go on kind of indefinitely. And I agree with what he's saying. I think the only thing I would say is that we're hoping that durable solutions are going to be the end of the displacement. And these things, if we set them up properly at the beginning, I'm hoping also that the process part ends up being fully handed over to the community itself so that it wouldn't be an endless engagement from our side. But I think that you should all have a look at Vincent's comment because it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you very much, Scott, and I think we need to stop here. There was a great interest towards the topic. I think we were more than 150 of us participating. As I said, there will be follow-up actions. We have all the email addresses of every participant who joined this session, so we will send out all the relevant materials. And I would like to again thank you for the presentations to Jackie and Scott, and keep in touch, everyone. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.